There's a specific kind of pain that doesn't have a name in most languages. It's not grief. It's not failure. It's not even regret, exactly, though it lives close to regret. It's the feeling that arrives quietly, usually somewhere in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when nothing dramatic is happening and everything is technically fine. It's the feeling of looking at your own life from a slight distance and thinking, how did I get here? And is this really what I meant to build? Most people feel this at least once. Many people feel it repeatedly, across years, and never quite figure out what to do with it. They push it down. They get busy. They scroll. They make plans they don't follow through on. They wait for some future version of circumstances that will finally make everything feel right. Friedrich Nietzsche felt that feeling too, and he refused to look away from it. Nietzsche lived what most people would describe as an objectively difficult life. Chronic illness from his 20s onward, migraines so severe they would leave him bedridden for days, eyesight so poor that writing became physically agonizing. He never had a stable home. He lost his closest friendships. The books he poured everything into were almost entirely ignored during his lifetime. He died in 1900 after a decade of mental breakdown, having seen almost none of the recognition that would eventually transform the entire direction of Western philosophy. And yet, the man wrote with a kind of ferocious clarity about human life that has not been matched before or since. Not because he had easy answers, because he refused easy answers, because he looked at the things most people flinch away from. Suffering, meaninglessness, the fragility of everything we build, the dishonesty buried in our most comfortable beliefs. And he kept looking until he understood them. What he found, across a lifetime of that kind of unflinching attention, were truths. Not comfortable ones, not the kind you stitch onto pillows, but the kind that, once you really hear them, once they land in you rather than just passing through, actually change something. The kind that feel, when you encounter them honestly, like someone turning a light on in a room you'd been navigating in the dark for years. These are truths that most people only learn the hard way, through the specific pain of years spent ignoring them, through the slow accumulation of choices made from fear instead of clarity, from habit instead of intention, from other people's expectations instead of their own genuine desires. Nietzsche was trying to warn us. Not kindly, he was rarely kind in the conventional sense, but honestly and with enormous urgency, because he believed that a life spent avoiding these truths was not a life saved from pain. It was a life spent accumulating a very specific, very unnecessary, very preventable kind of suffering. The suffering of someone who had the capacity to live fully and chose, over and over again, not to. This is not a biography. This is not a philosophy lecture. Think of it more like a conversation between his ideas and the choices you're making right now. Between what he saw across all that pain and clarity and ferocious writing and what you might not yet have let yourself fully see. Some of what follows will be uncomfortable. Some of it will feel like it was written specifically about you, in a way that good philosophy sometimes does. That uncanny feeling of being caught in the act of something you thought nobody had noticed. That's not a coincidence. Nietzsche was writing about the patterns that repeat across human lives, regardless of era, culture, or circumstance. He was writing about you, and about me, with the kind of precision that only comes from looking at these things without blinking. So let's not blink. Before anything else, this one. Because everything else in Nietzsche's philosophy rests on it, and because getting it wrong, which most people do, is the source of an enormous amount of unnecessary pain. Here is what most of us are taught, explicitly or implicitly, from the time we're very young. Suffering is bad. The goal of a good life is to minimize suffering. The measure of whether things are going well is largely the degree to which you feel comfortable, secure, and free from pain. When suffering arrives, and it always arrives, the correct response is to fix it, escape it, medicate it, or at minimum to explain it away with some story about why it is temporary and will end soon. This is the foundational assumption of a very large portion of human culture, self-help, therapy, and common sense. And Nietzsche is not here to tell you that suffering is pleasant. He's here to tell you that this foundational assumption is, at a very deep level, wrong, and that the wrongness of it is causing far more damage than the suffering itself. Let's start with something concrete. Think about the most significant growth you've experienced in your life. The periods where you actually changed, where something fundamental in you shifted, where you became someone noticeably different from who you'd been before. Not incrementally different, genuinely different. More capable, more clear, more honest, more resilient, more yourself. Was any of that growth comfortable? Really think about it. The periods of greatest change in most human lives, the ones people look back on with something that isn't quite gratitude but is close to it, almost universally involve some combination of loss, disorientation, difficulty, and the collapse of something previously assumed to be permanent. The end of a relationship that forced you to figure out who you actually were without it. The failure that stripped away an identity you'd been hiding behind. The period of genuine uncertainty where you couldn't fall back on the usual answers and had to find new ones. The illness or loss that restructured your entire sense of what mattered. These are not things we would choose in advance, but they are, if we're honest, often the things we're most glad to have gone through. The thing we couldn't have predicted beforehand is that the difficulty was not incidental to the growth. The difficulty was the growth. Nietzsche understood this at a level that went beyond individual experience into something more structural. He saw that the human organism, the self, the psyche, the whole complicated system of a person, is not designed for comfort. It is designed for challenge. It grows through resistance, through overcoming, through the specific kind of friction that only genuine difficulty provides. Take that friction away entirely, and the system doesn't flourish. It softens. It loses definition. It starts to feel, without being able to say why, vaguely purposeless. This is what he meant by the famous line that gets reduced to motivational posters. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. The actual German, was mich nicht umbringt, macht mich stärker, carries something slightly more precise and more interesting than the English translation usually conveys. Not, everything that fails to destroy you is secretly beneficial. But the encounter with genuine difficulty, survived and metabolized, increases capacity. It builds something in you that could not have been built any other way. The crucial word is metabolized. Because the other thing Nietzsche understood was that suffering is not automatically productive. Suffering endured passively, suffered through without reflection or engagement, without the willingness to actually be changed by it. That kind of suffering is just pain. It accumulates without giving anything back. It makes you harder and more defended, not stronger and more open. It teaches you only that pain is bad and that you should avoid it, which is the exact wrong lesson. The difference between suffering that builds and suffering that merely damages is not primarily about the nature of the suffering itself. It's about how you orient to it, whether you're facing into it or away from it, whether you're asking it questions or trying to silence it, whether you're letting it change you or desperately trying to stay the same person you were before it arrived. Nietzsche's word for the productive orientation to suffering was amor fati, love of fate. Not an easy phrase, not something that happens automatically. A practice, a discipline, the daily, ongoing, often failing commitment to meet what actually happens, including and especially the painful parts, with openness rather than pure resistance. This does not mean performing happiness you don't feel. It does not mean pretending that loss isn't loss, or that pain isn't pain. It means something more specific and more demanding. The refusal to be defined against your experience. The refusal to let the worst things that happen to you become the prisons you live in. The insistence on staying in relationship, with your own life, all of it, rather than splitting yourself into the parts you approve of and the parts you wish away. And there is a practical dimension to this that Nietzsche makes clear, in ways that often get overlooked. When you resist suffering, when your entire orientation to it is, make it stop, get away from it, fix it as fast as possible, you miss the information it contains. Because suffering is almost always pointing at something, usually at a gap between how things are and what you actually value, between the life you're living and the life you need to be living, between the choices you've been making on autopilot and the choices that would actually align with who you're becoming. Pain is signal. Avoidance is what turns signal into noise, and eventually into something much larger and harder to deal with than the original signal was. The person who runs from difficulty for years and then wonders why the difficulty has only grown larger, more pervasive, more formless, that person has mistaken escape for progress. Nietzsche's warning is simple and severe. You are not going to get through life without suffering. No version of success, security, or spiritual attainment makes you exempt. The question is not whether it will come. The question is what you will do with it when it does. Whether you will face it and let it do what difficulty does. Deepen you, complicate you, make you capable of things you couldn't have been capable of before. Or whether you will run from it and discover, years later, that you have been running in a very small circle. The relationship to suffering is the foundation. Everything else Nietzsche says about becoming who you are rests on whether you can get this part right. Not perfectly right, nobody manages that, but right enough, facing enough, metabolizing enough. The growth is on the other side of the discomfort. It always was. You already knew this in some part of yourself that you don't always listen to. Nietzsche is just insisting that you listen. Here is an experiment worth trying. Pick a belief you hold strongly, something you feel genuinely committed to, a moral principle, a definition of success, an idea about what a good relationship looks like, or what a meaningful career looks like, or what kind of person you're supposed to be. Something that feels solid and yours. Now ask, where did this belief come from? Not the polished story you might tell yourself, the actual origin. Was it something you arrived at through your own lived experience and genuine reflection? Or was it something you absorbed from your parents, your culture, your religion, your school, your peer group, before you were old enough to have the tools to examine it? Most people, if they're honest, find that the beliefs they hold most firmly are also the ones they've examined least. They feel certain precisely because they've never been questioned. They feel foundational because they arrived before the capacity for questioning did. They feel like bedrock, but when you actually tap them, when you apply real pressure and ask, why do I believe this? Really, what would I lose if I stopped believing it? What am I protecting by holding on to it? A lot of them turn out to be hollow. This is what Nietzsche called the genealogy of morals, the attempt to trace values back to their actual historical and psychological origins rather than accepting them as self-evident truths. And what he found, doing this work, disturbed him enormously, not because the values were all wrong, but because almost nobody had actually chosen them. Almost everyone was operating on a moral and psychological inheritance they had never opened, examined, and consciously kept or discarded. Think about what this means for a life. If you've never actually examined the belief that success looks a certain specific way, the house, the title, the visible markers of having made it, then you might spend 30 years chasing a definition of success that was never actually yours. And when you arrive at it, if you arrive at it, there will be a moment of staggering emptiness. Because the thing you were chasing was never pointing toward anything you actually valued. It was pointing toward something someone else valued. And you absorbed their map without checking whether it matched your territory. If you've never actually examined the belief that self-sacrifice is automatically virtuous, that putting your own needs last is the morally superior position, you might spend decades making yourself smaller in every relationship you enter, wondering why you feel invisible and resentful, not realizing that the belief itself is the source of the problem. Not because self-sacrifice is always wrong, but because an unexamined self-sacrifice is often just fear wearing virtue's clothes. If you've never actually examined the belief that certain emotions, anger, ambition, desire, are shameful or dangerous and need to be suppressed, you might spend years cutting off access to parts of yourself that are not actually shameful, but are actually powerful and important. The suppressed anger that is really a boundary signal, the ambition that is really a compass pointing toward something you genuinely love, the desire that is really information about what kind of life would actually fit. Nietzsche's word for the unexamined inheritance of values was herd morality, and he used it with contempt, not because he despised ordinary people, but because he found it genuinely tragic. A sheep who has been told it is a sheep and has never questioned it will live a sheep's life regardless of its actual nature. The tragedy is not stupidity. The tragedy is the absence of examination. The tragedy is that something specific and particular and potentially extraordinary is living a generic, inherited, off-the-shelf life because it never thought to ask whether the shelf it picked from was actually its own. Now, and this is the part that requires real honesty, this process of examination is uncomfortable, genuinely uncomfortable, because when you start questioning the values you've inherited, two things happen simultaneously. First, you feel groundless. The values you've built your life on, even if they were never actually yours, were at least structurally supportive. They gave you a direction. They gave you a story. When you start actually examining them, there is a period, sometimes a long period, where the old structures are being questioned and the new ones haven't solidified yet. Nietzsche called this the most dangerous passage, the moment when the old God is dead, but the new values haven't yet been created. It feels like free fall. It feels like loss. But second, and this is what most people never get to, because they retreat from the free fall. On the other side of that groundlessness is something that feels entirely different. A sturdier kind of ground. The kind that comes from having actually looked at what you're standing on and chosen it, rather than just finding yourself on it by accident. The values you arrive at through genuine examination, even if some of them end up being similar to what you started with, have a different quality. They're load-bearing in a way that inherited values can never quite be, because you know what they're made of. You've seen how they hold up under pressure. You've tested them against the alternatives and found them, specifically and consciously, better. You chose them. They are, in a way that nothing unexamined can be, actually yours. The work of the revaluation of all values, Nietzsche's most central philosophical project, is not destruction for its own sake. It is not nihilism. It is not the claim that all values are equally meaningless. It is the insistence that values only mean anything, only actually function as the foundations. They're supposed to be, when they've been, consciously inhabited rather than unconsciously inherited. And the warning embedded in this is one of the most important things Nietzsche ever said. A person who has never examined their values will eventually find themselves living a life that isn't theirs, will eventually arrive at a moment, maybe at 2 a.m., maybe at 50, maybe at the end, where the hollow feeling becomes undeniable. Where the question is this really what I meant to build? Finally forces itself into the open. He was trying to get you to ask that question now, before the accumulation, before the decades of living according to someone else's map, before it becomes retrospective rather than directive. The question is not comfortable, but it is, according to Nietzsche, the most important question a person can ask themselves. And it is almost always asked too late. There is a particular social pressure that is so ambient, so continuous, so completely woven into the texture of daily life that most people don't notice it as a pressure at all. They just experience it as reality. It's the pressure to fit, to be approximately what the people around you are, to want roughly what they want, believe roughly what they believe, live roughly as they live. Not out of malice. The people around you are rarely consciously trying to contain you. It's just that human groups, as Nietzsche observed with extraordinary clarity, are organized around a kind of averaging. The group functions best when its members are roughly similar. Outliers, people who want something very different, who see things very differently, who are moving in a direction the group doesn't recognize, create friction. And friction is uncomfortable. So the group, without necessarily intending to, exerts a constant gentle pressure toward conformity. This pressure is not always visible as pressure. It comes wearing many faces. Sometimes it looks like concern. Are you sure that's a good idea? That seems really risky. I'm just worried about you. The person saying it often means it sincerely. But the worry, examined closely, is often less about the actual risks of your choice and more about the discomfort your choice creates in someone who has not made it. Your willingness to do the unconventional thing is, quietly, a challenge to their choice not to. And the easiest way to resolve that discomfort is to bring you back in line. Sometimes it looks like mockery. The career choice that gets laughed at. The creative project that gets dismissed before it's done. The ambition that gets called naive. Mockery is one of the most effective tools for social conformity because it weaponizes the human terror of looking ridiculous. Nobody wants to be the person who tried something and failed publicly. So the preemptive mockery, who do you think you are anyway, often succeeds in stopping the attempt before it happens. Sometimes it looks like simple indifference. The people around you have no strong opinion about your choices. They're just not interested in anything too far outside their own orbit. And that indifference, when it comes from people whose opinion you care about, can be as damping as active criticism. It tells you, without quite saying it, nothing you do that's genuinely different will matter to us. Nietzsche watched this mechanism operate across individuals and cultures and saw it for what it was, the fundamental conservatism of the herd. Not conservatism in a political sense, in a structural sense. Groups conserve themselves. They resist change. They pull toward the average. And the people in them who have the capacity for something more than the average are often quietly destroyed by this pull. Not with violence, with gentleness, with love even, with the patient repetition of, "You're fine as you are. There's no need to do that. Why would you want to be different?" He called this one of the great tragedies of human life. Not the external destruction of potential by hostile forces, the internal abandonment of potential by people who could not withstand the social cost of becoming themselves. Because the cost is real. This is not a motivational speech pretending that being different is easy and that anyone who struggles with it just isn't trying hard enough. The cost of genuine individuality, the cost of choosing your own direction when it diverges significantly from the people around you, is real and ongoing. You lose belonging, at least temporarily. You lose the comfort of being understood, of not having to explain yourself. You lose the security of numbers, the reassurance that comes from knowing a lot of people have made the choices you're making and it's worked out fine. In exchange for what? Nietzsche was honest about this too. In exchange for something that is very difficult to articulate in advance, because it only becomes visible from the other side. The thing you gain by refusing to be averaged down into someone else's idea of who you should be is not a thing that can be packaged and sold as an alternative to belonging. It is more like an integrity, a coherence between what you actually are and what you're actually doing with your life. It is quiet and private and often deeply uncomfortable for long stretches. And it is, in Nietzsche's view, the only thing worth having. The warning he embeds in this, the thing he wanted people to understand before it was too late. is that the pull toward the herd doesn't announce itself as a compromise. It announces itself as common sense. It feels from the inside like simply being reasonable, like not being grandiose, like keeping your feet on the ground. The person who has spent 20 years slowly giving up everything particular about themselves in exchange for social acceptance doesn't usually experience that process as loss. They experience it as maturity, as settling down, as learning what really matters. And then, at some point, sometimes not until very late, the hollow feeling arrives. The sense that the shape they've settled into is not quite theirs. That the life they're living is someone else's life, lived very competently, but lived by the wrong person. Nietzsche's prescription was not to flee society or despise other people. He himself craved connection and was devastated by loneliness in a way his writing makes painfully clear. The prescription was more precise than that, to develop the internal calibration that allows you to feel the pull toward conformity and still make a conscious choice about how much of it to follow. To know, with some reliability, which compromises serve your deepest purposes and which ones erode them. To stop outsourcing the question of who you're becoming to the aggregate preferences of the people around you. To be, in the deepest sense, your own standard. Not arrogance, not isolation, not the performance of individualism that is itself just another form of social conformity, just aimed at a different crowd, something quieter and more internal than any of that. The capacity to ask, in any moment of social pressure, what do I actually think? What do I actually want? What would I choose if I weren't afraid of what would happen if I chose it? And then to actually choose it. The crowd will always try to make you smaller. Nietzsche wanted you to know that before you'd spent too many years letting it succeed. There's a particular flavor of inner life that Nietzsche identified with a word he borrowed from French: ressentiment. It's usually translated as resentment, but it's actually something slightly more specific and considerably darker than what we usually mean by that word. Ressentiment is not just the feeling of having been wronged. It is the transformation of that feeling into an organizing principle. It is the way a person who experiences themselves as powerless, who cannot strike back at what has injured them, who cannot achieve what they want, who feels blocked at every turn, begins to construct their entire value system around their grievance, around the injustice, around the gap between what they have and what they feel they deserve. It's the way bitterness becomes a worldview. Nietzsche traced the psychology of ressentiment through history and culture with extraordinary precision. He saw it as the psychological engine behind certain kinds of moral systems, systems that define goodness not through what they affirm, but through what they oppose. Systems built on the identification of an enemy and the claim that everything the enemy represents is evil. Systems where the primary source of meaning is the grievance, rather than any positive vision of what could be built. But before we get too comfortable thinking about this as a cultural phenomenon rather than a personal one, let's bring it closer. Think about the people you know who have been genuinely wronged at some point in their lives, an injustice done to them, a betrayal, a failure of someone important to show up, a loss that shouldn't have happened, a situation where they were genuinely treated unfairly. That wrong is real. The injury is real. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. Now think about what happens over time to the people who never quite metabolize that wrong, who carry it, who, without necessarily intending to, begin to organize their understanding of the world around it, who see new situations through the lens of that old injury, who are always, at some level, watching for proof that it's happening again, who define themselves, increasingly, as the person that happened to. What happens to those people over years is not that they get closer to justice or resolution. What happens is that the injury, which was originally something done to them from outside, becomes something they're doing to themselves from inside. The resentment, initially a reasonable response to a real situation, calcifies into a way of being. And a way of being built around resentment has a very particular quality. It is fundamentally oriented backward and inward. It is consuming energy that could be building something. It is keeping the wound open by returning to it constantly and calling that vigilance. Nietzsche saw this clearly and described it with unusual bluntness. The person of resentment is always looking for a scapegoat, always in need of an enemy, an explanation, a guilty party who can bear the weight of everything that has gone wrong. Because as long as the problem is them, whoever them is, then the problem is located outside. And therefore the solution is also outside. And therefore there is nothing the resenting person actually has to do except wait for the outside to change, which it generally doesn't, or not in the way they're waiting for. This is the most expensive part of resentment. Not the anger itself. Anger can be productive, can be clarifying, can be the energy behind necessary change. The expensive part is the waiting. The passive orientation, the years spent carrying something heavy that isn't serving any function, while declining to put it down and use your hands for something else. Nietzsche's word for the alternative to resentment was active forgetting. And he didn't mean this in the therapeutic, feel-good sense of releasing your baggage. He meant something more fundamental, the capacity of a genuinely powerful nature to simply not be defined by what has been done to it. Not because what was done was fine, but because a person who is genuinely oriented toward their own creation, toward what they're building, toward what they're becoming, doesn't have the bandwidth to give their injuries a permanent residence. Think about people you've encountered in your own life who have this quality. People who have, by any objective measure, experienced significant difficulty and injustice, and yet who seem not to be carrying it around, who have a kind of forward momentum that isn't denial, isn't forced positivity, isn't pretending the hard things didn't happen. It's more like they've processed and moved on, and are genuinely gone from the old territory, who are interested in what's ahead rather than what's behind. That quality, which Nietzsche would identify as the opposite of resentment, is not about having had an easier life. It is not about having been wronged less severely. It is about something in the orientation, about where the energy goes, about whether the self is organized around building or around accounting, around creation or around grievance. The warning embedded in this truth is one of the hardest he ever issued. Holding on to resentment, even justified resentment, even resentment in response to genuinely real injustice, costs you your future. Not metaphorically, literally. The mental and emotional energy that goes into maintaining a resentment, keeping it alive, nurturing it, organizing your perceptions around it, is energy that cannot simultaneously go into building what you actually want to build. You can be right about the injustice and still be destroying yourself by your relationship to it. That's not fair. Nietzsche knew it wasn't fair, but he also knew, with the clear-eyed, unsentimental honesty that characterizes all of his best thinking, that life has very little interest in fairness, and that organizing your existence around the demand for fairness that isn't coming is one of the most reliable ways to waste it. The alternative is not to pretend the injury didn't happen. It is to look at it clearly, to allow it to have been real, to do whatever genuine processing is available, and then, this is the hard part, to stop giving it primary residence, to make the conscious decision that you are more interested in what you're building than in what was taken from you. That decision, if you can actually make it, is one of the most powerful ones available, and most people make it too late, if at all. Here is a thing Nietzsche understood that most modern culture is organized to prevent you from seeing. There is a version of comfort that is, in a very real sense, a slow form of destruction. Not all comfort, not rest, not joy, not the genuine satisfaction of needs. Those are not what he's talking about. He's talking about a specific phenomenon, the condition of a person who has arranged their life so carefully around the avoidance of discomfort that they have. In the process, also arranged it around the avoidance of everything that would require them to grow. He gave this figure a name, the last man, the letzte Mensch, a figure of pure philosophical contempt. Not contempt for any individual person, but for a certain configuration of human life. The last man lives in a world where all the major questions have been supposedly answered, where all the rough edges have been sanded down, where everything is convenient and comfortable and optimized. The last man says we invented happiness, and blinks, with weary satisfaction, with the mild pride of someone who has successfully avoided anything demanding for a very long time. The last man wants nothing large, risks nothing real, creates nothing of consequence, exists primarily as a consumer of content, of comfort, of prepackaged meaning. And the disturbing thing about the last man, the reason Nietzsche presents this figure with such urgency, is that this is not a distant, dystopian future scenario. It is the available option. Right now, today, the path of least resistance, smoothed further with every new technology designed to reduce friction in human experience. Look at the structure of the comfort trap, as Nietzsche would have analyzed it. When you consistently choose comfort over challenge, when the reflex to retreat is stronger than the reflex to engage, what happens is not simply that you avoid unpleasantness. What happens is that your tolerance for discomfort decreases. The range of things that feel threatening or overwhelming gradually expands. The things you feel capable of handling gradually contracts. The self becomes less elastic, less resilient, less capable of encountering the unexpected without being destabilized. And here is where it gets particularly insidious. The person in the comfort trap generally doesn't experience themselves as becoming smaller. They experience themselves as protecting themselves. The avoidance strategies feel like prudence, like self-care, like finally learning not to take unnecessary risks. The gradual withdrawal from difficulty feels like maturity, like knowing your limits. But limits, Nietzsche would insist, are not fixed properties of the self. They are dynamic. They expand when you push against them and contract when you stop. The person who never pushes discovers, eventually, that they can no longer do things they used to do, that their world has grown smaller without any single catastrophic event. Just a long series of small retreats, each one reasonable, each one comfortable, each one imperceptibly narrowing what feels possible. The will to power, in the sense that Nietzsche actually meant, is precisely the opposite of this. It is the orientation toward growth, expansion, self-overcoming, the insistence on seeking challenges that genuinely stretch you, not suffering for its own sake, not difficulty as a performance of seriousness, but the specific kind of challenge that calls to something in you, that requires you to become more than you currently are in order to meet it. And the reason this matters so much, the reason it is one of the truths people learn too late, is that this orientation, once it's been fully surrendered to comfort, is genuinely difficult to reclaim. The muscles you don't use atrophy. The capacity for risk, if it's never exercised, slowly diminishes. The person who spends 5 years avoiding everything difficult will find, at the end of those 5 years, that the things which once seemed like reasonable challenges now feel overwhelming. That the world has not gotten harder. They have gotten softer. And softening, in Nietzsche's framework, is a form of dying that happens before death. He wanted people to understand this before it was too late, before the accumulated comfort had done its quiet work, before the life had been arranged so carefully around the avoidance of difficulty that there was no longer any real life left inside it. The discomfort you're avoiding right now, whatever it is, the conversation you keep not having, the thing you keep meaning to start but haven't, the challenge you keep deciding you're not ready for yet, the risk you keep deciding is not quite the right time to take. It is costing you more than you think. Not in some vague spiritual sense, concretely. Every day you spend successfully avoiding it is a day you spend slightly softer, slightly smaller, slightly more convinced that the avoidance was the right choice. Nietzsche's warning: the last man's life is always more comfortable than yours, right up until it becomes completely hollow. Here is something Nietzsche understood about the self that took the rest of science and psychology about a century to catch up with. There is no fixed, stable, essential self waiting to be discovered underneath everything. There is only what you do, what you choose, what you build, through the accumulating weight of your repeated decisions, day after day, year after year. This sounds, at first, like a reason for despair. If there's no essential self, if there's no core identity that is just naturally and reliably you, then isn't everything arbitrary? Isn't the self just a series of random reactions to circumstances with no real author? Nietzsche's answer is the opposite of despair. If there is no fixed self, if what you are is something that is actively created rather than passively discovered, then you are not trapped. You are not predetermined. You are not the inevitable product of your history, your family, your biology, your early experiences. You are at every moment in the process of making yourself. And making can always go differently than it has. The practical implication of this is both exciting and demanding. What it means is that the question, "Who am I?" is less useful than the question, "Who am I becoming?" And the question, "Who am I becoming?" is answered not by what you think about yourself, not by your intentions, your self-concept, your narrative, but by what you actually do, repeatedly, consistently, when no one is watching and there's no particular pressure. Think about the gap, which almost everyone has, between the self they narrate and the self they actually enact. The person who thinks of themselves as courageous but consistently chooses the safe option when it matters. The person who thinks of themselves as generous but finds reasons not to give when giving would cost something real. The person who believes they value depth and authenticity but spends most of their attention on things that are shallow and performed. Nietzsche is not interested in the narrated self. He is interested in the enacted self, because that is the only self that actually exists. The story you tell about who you are is, unless it's grounded in repeated actual choices, just a story, a comfort, a way of holding on to an identity that your behavior isn't actually supporting. This is uncomfortable to sit with, but it's also, if you let it be, enormously clarifying. Because if what you are is what you repeatedly choose, then the path to becoming different is not primarily about changing how you think about yourself, or working on your internal narrative, or achieving some insight about your patterns. The path to becoming different is simply to start making different choices, small ones, repeatedly, until the accumulation of different choices has built a self that enacts different patterns automatically, until the courage that was once an effort becomes a habit, until the generosity that was once a decision becomes a reflex, until the discipline that was once a struggle becomes simply what you do. Nietzsche called this self-overcoming, and he saw it as the central project of a human life. Not overcoming others, not overcoming circumstances, overcoming the previous version of yourself, the habits, the reflexes, the patterns of retreat that have calcified around you, the comfortable defaults, the automatic reactions that run on old code. Self-overcoming requires a very specific thing: the willingness to see yourself accurately. Not the version you prefer, not the version you perform for others. The actual pattern. The thing you do when you're tired and it's hard, and no one's watching, and the easier choice is right there. Most people don't develop this willingness because it is genuinely uncomfortable, and because the machinery of self-concept is specifically designed to protect you from it. The rationalizations come automatically. The reasons why this time doesn't count, why this exception is reasonable, why the pattern you're noticing isn't really a pattern. These arrive with remarkable speed and sophistication. The self is very good at explaining itself to itself. Nietzsche's method, insofar as he had a method, was to develop a relationship with the truth that was stronger than the relationship with comfort. To value accuracy about oneself above the consolation of a flattering self-image. To be willing to see the pattern and to sit with the discomfort of that seeing, long enough to actually do something about it. And the thing to do about it, the only thing that actually works, is to choose differently. Once, then again after that, without waiting to feel ready, because the feeling of readiness is generated by the habit of choosing courageously, not the other way around. You do not find yourself, you make yourself, and you make yourself in the same way that any craftsman makes anything, through the accumulation of deliberate, repeated, effortful choices that slowly give shape to something that wasn't there before. Nietzsche believed you were capable of this. He also believed most people discover this too, late, after they've spent decades letting the making happen by default rather than by design. This one is difficult to talk about because the word solitude carries so much cultural baggage. We tend to hear it as either romantic, the lone genius on the mountain, perfectly at peace, or as a warning sign. Loneliness, social failure, the thing you're supposed to be working to overcome. Nietzsche meant neither of those things. He meant something more specific, more functional, and considerably more demanding. He meant the capacity to be genuinely alone with yourself, with your actual thoughts, your actual feelings, your actual uncertainties, without immediately reaching for noise, company, or distraction to fill the gap. The capacity to sit in that space without running from it. And more than that, to discover that the space itself is generative. That the things you cannot find in the company of others, because they require a kind of attention that company makes impossible, are available in that space. Nietzsche wrote almost all of his most important work in conditions of profound solitude. Not chosen solitude in many cases. The loneliness was often painful, often imposed by circumstance and illness, and the difficulty of being genuinely understood. But what he found in that solitude, over and over, was that the thinking which was impossible in the presence of other people's expectations and reactions and conversations became possible when it was just him and the page. The thoughts that were too slow, too strange, too unformed to survive in social interaction. Those thoughts could develop in solitude, could become something. This is not an argument for hermitage. Nietzsche is not saying, leave everyone and go be alone on a mountain. He is saying something more practical and more accessible. Make time for genuine solitude. Not the passive solitude of being alone while scrolling. Not the quasi-solitude of listening to a podcast while doing something else. Actual, unmediated, uncomfortable aloneness with your own mind. And this is where the cultural difficulty comes in. We live in a moment where solitude is, in a very practical sense, almost never allowed to develop. Every moment of potential silence is a moment where the device vibrates, where the notification arrives, where the next episode is already queued up. The architecture of modern life is designed, sometimes deliberately, sometimes just as a byproduct of economic incentives, to ensure that genuine aloneness with your own thoughts is the exception, rather than the rule. And this has a cost that Nietzsche would have recognized immediately. The thoughts that require solitude, too, develop our specific kinds of thoughts. Not the surface-level processing of information that can happen in the midst of distraction. The deeper kind, the kind where you're actually following something, a feeling, a question, a dim intuition, into territory you haven't been before. The kind where the answer isn't waiting for you at the end of a search, but has to be assembled, slowly, from materials that are only available inside. The kind where you don't know in advance what you're looking for, and you have to sit with not knowing long enough for something to emerge. This is where the things worth knowing about yourself live. And it is exactly where most people never go, because going there requires tolerating the initial discomfort of genuine quiet. The first few minutes of real solitude, for someone who isn't used to it, can feel almost unbearable. The restlessness, the urge to reach for the phone, the sense that nothing is happening, that you're wasting time, that you should be doing something. Nietzsche's response to that discomfort: stay. The discomfort is not a sign that solitude is wrong for you. It is a sign that you are unaccustomed to being with yourself, which is itself significant. Information about what has been missing. He wrote beautifully about the need for what he called great health. Not just physical health, but a kind of psychological and intellectual vitality that requires, among other things, the regular experience of genuine solitude. The encounter with your own mind without any mediator. The discipline of following your own thinking wherever it goes, without the constant pressure of other people's expectations and reactions. Here is where everything else collects. There is a concept in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, arguably his most important work, and certainly his strangest, that is usually called the eternal recurrence. We touched on it earlier, but here, at the end, it deserves to be felt in full, because it is the most demanding thing he ever asked a person to sit with, and it is the direct philosophical expression of this final truth. The thought experiment. Imagine that your life, this specific life, with all its choices, all its beautiful parts, and all its painful parts, all the things you did and all the things you didn't do, was going to repeat. Exactly. Infinitely. Not a different life. Not an improved version. Not a do-over. This one. As it actually was and is. Your first response to this thought tells you something important. If it arrives with a kind of quiet satisfaction, yes, I'd do it again, roughly as it went, that is significant. Not perfection, not the absence of regret, but something like overall alignment. Something like a life that was genuinely lived. But for most people, and Nietzsche knew this, the thought arrives with something else, a tightening, a particular kind of unease. Not about the painful things. Most people can accept that life involves pain. The unease is specifically about the unlived things, about the choices that were never made, the risks that were never taken, the version of yourself that was always about to emerge and somehow never quite did, the thing you kept meaning to do when the time was right, when you were more ready, when circumstances allowed. That, the weight of the unlived. That is what the eternal recurrence illuminates with particular precision, because in the thought experiment, there is no future where the unlived thing finally gets lived. There is only what already is. The accumulation of what was actually chosen, actually done, actually risked. Not what was planned or intended or promised to yourself. The eternal return makes the unlived permanent. Nietzsche understood this to be the most effective possible way of clarifying what actually matters. Not the things you say matter. Not the things you're vaguely planning to prioritize someday. The things you're actually spending your life on, day by day, in the choices that make themselves known in actual behavior. And the truth he's pointing at, the one most people learn too late, if they learn it at all, is this. The unlived life does not wait patiently. It does not simply remain a potential, an open door, a possibility to be exercised later. It accrues. It accumulates. It gradually becomes the heaviest thing you carry. Not through any single dramatic failure, but through the repetition of small, unrealized moments. The word unspoken, the leap not taken, the creative impulse dismissed, the genuine desire overridden by prudence, by fear, by the weight of other people's expectations, by the comfortable assumption that there will always be time later. There is a moment, different for everyone, but real for almost everyone who has lived long enough, where the future stops feeling infinite, and the weight of what was not done becomes undeniable. Where the question is this really what I meant to build? Can no longer be deferred to tomorrow, because tomorrow has started to feel less available. Nietzsche is not trying to frighten you, or rather, he is trying to frighten you, but in the way that a good friend frightens you when they tell you the thing you need to hear before it's too late. With urgency, with care, with the genuine belief that you are capable of more than you're currently giving yourself permission to attempt. The heaviest burden, in his view, is not the difficulty of a life genuinely lived. It is not the risk taken, the failure experienced, the attempt made. These things are hard, but they have weight in the way that exercise has weight. Productive? Building. Oriented towards something? The heaviest burden? The one that keeps people up at 2 a.m. with the hollow ceiling-staring feeling, is the weight of the life not quite lived, of the potential not quite actualized, of the self that was always becoming and somehow never quite arrived. He wanted you to know this before the accumulation began, before the calendar of unlived days had grown too long to contemplate easily. He wanted you to ask, now, not later, what you would actually choose if you were truly choosing. If comfort and fear and other people's opinions and the weight of inherited expectations were not the primary factors, what would you actually do? Nietzsche died at 55, having spent a decade unable to work, after a period of extraordinary creative productivity that almost nobody paid attention to while it was happening. His books were largely ignored. His ideas were misunderstood. His personal life was marked by loneliness and physical suffering, and the particular pain of a person who saw things too clearly for his time. And yet, the last fully lucid thing he ever wrote was a book called Ex Homo, How One Becomes What One Is. It was not a lament. It was not a reckoning with regret. It was, in its strange and extravagant and deeply unusual way, a kind of affirmation, a statement that the life had been worth it, that the ideas had been worth the pain, that the commitment to seeing clearly, regardless of the social and personal cost, had been the right choice. He could not have foreseen the influence. He had no way of knowing in those final years of clarity before the breakdown that what he was writing in obscure rented rooms in Switzerland and Italy would eventually reshape the direction of an entire civilization's thinking about value, meaning, power, and what it actually means to be a human being. What he knew, what he chose, was to keep being honest, to keep looking at the things most people preferred not to see, to keep writing from the place of genuine conviction rather than social acceptability, to keep betting on the truth even when the truth was costly. That is the version of his life he would have wanted to live. Again, the question his philosophy leaves you with, the one that runs underneath everything he ever wrote, is simple and devastating. What is the version of your life that you would want to live again? Not an improved version. Not a version where everything went right. This specific, particular, difficult, and unrepeatable one, is there a way of living it that you would choose, faced with the eternal recurrence, to choose again? And if not, what needs to change? Not someday. Not when the circumstances align. Now. Today. In the choices that are available to you right now, in this actual life, with these actual materials. Nietzsche spent his whole life trying to wake people up, not to his philosophy specifically, to their own, to the particular and irreplaceable quality of their own genuine experience, their own genuine values, their own genuine capacity for something more than the comfortable, the inherited, the safe, and the small. He wanted people to hear his warning before it was too late. You've heard it now. What you do with it is, as he would have insisted, entirely yours.